This bonus episode is from day one of a 5-part mini-seminar series I've been running on Facebook Live on the World Organic News Facebook page. This is the audio from that presentation. If you'd like to see the whole thing, you can go over to worldorganicnews.com and click on the Seminars tab at the top of the page. Thanks for listening, and we'll have parts 2, 3, 4 and 5 as they become available. Organic News, No Dig Gardening Explained, the Change Underground System, series of mini-seminars. Indeed, welcome one and all. Today we'll be going through session 1 of 5, which is all about why no dig anyway. Tomorrow I'll be covering heirloom seeds. Day after, no bare soil or weeds. Day 4, pesticides, herbicides, a question mark. Indeed, it's a very big question. And then on day 5 we'll be covering the Change Underground System, which brings everything together. So let's get underway with why no dig. Why indeed? The question I ask myself first with anything I'm doing in the garden is, what would nature do? Or what does nature do? Which was perhaps more direct. And then I ask, why is this the natural way? And finally, why would we copy nature? So let's get underway with what does nature do. Nature layers, and nature avoids bare soil. Now if you think about the first one, nature layers, and cast your mind into a forest if you've been in one lately, or even if you haven't, just think about being in a forest. And the forest floors. The older the forest, the softer the soil is underfoot, with more and more layering of dropped leaves and branches, of course, occasionally, and even trees themselves falling. But a pine forest will give you a whole nice bed underneath of pine needles. A deciduous forest dumps once a year with the autumn leaf drop. And, of course, a dry sclerophyll forest like, say, a eucalypt forest, you're going to get leaves as well as huge chunks of bark that peel off every year. And, of course, the widowmaker branches that fall for no particular reason that we can see. But it's not just forests, they're just a really good example of how nature layers. If you cast your mind to grasslands, you get different effects. So at the end of the summer season, as the summer grasses die off and form a mat on the ground, you get the winter grasses growing through them and providing more life in the area. And then as they die off, they provide the mat covering for the summer grasses to grow back through, and so on, ad infinitum. And this is because nature avoids bare soil. Classically, the explanation is that it's a response to the end of glacial periods, so at the end of the last ice age, between the Pleistocene and the Holocene, about 10 to 12,000 years ago, depending on where on the planet you are and how you decide to date it, you get the retreat of the glaciers. And similarly, as we're moving into the Anthropocene from the Holocene, we're seeing a lot of glaciers retreat even now. And the thing that stands out about a retreated glacier is that it leaves bare soil and rock. And nature tends to avoid bare soil because of the question of erosion. Now, erosion can come in two forms, basically wind and water. If we think about wind erosion, I assume people saw the vision of the dust clouds that were rolling across the eastern part of the Australian mainland over their last fire summer. And that was just soil that had been picked up by the wind after the drought and the fires and blowing it into towns. But perhaps more worrying for the effects of erosion is water erosion. Now, places like Egypt, classically, the Nile used to flood and bring lots of silt to the land, which allowed people to grow lots of crops. But that silt had to come from somewhere. And that's the same thing in the Yellow River and the Yangtze in China and most other major rivers. But we've added to the problem by one, damming those rivers, and so the silt's building up behind the dam walls, but also modern agriculture with the plough and the bare soil, which is going against everything that nature's trying to avoid. But we should be obviously doing something about that. And the other thing that's missing from soil, particularly in our understanding of it and the way she's taught in academic situations, is life. I remember when I did any soil science, it was always about the physics and the chemistry. So the physics about the particle sizes and how they interact, and the chemistry was about the pH and whatever chemicals were in the soil to feed the plants and whatnot. But the missing part, the part that really needs to be fostered and regrown, is the life, the biological part. I think we're all mostly fully aware of the microbial nature of healthy soil. But in the last few years, there's been the discovery, not so much the discovery as the recording of the wood wide web, as it's called in popular terms, the interconnecting of trees and other plants and shrubs with fungus, mycelia, under the soil. So the mushrooms we see above ground are just the fruiting parts of the fungus. The really interesting stuff's going on underneath, in fact underground, and where trees are being connected to each other and passing food and elements back and forth, and things are being stored in the mycelia until the plants need it. And plants of different species appear to be communicating one to another. So it's a thing to add to our understanding of bare soil. And bare soil loses life very, very quickly, which then allows more erosion to carry on. And the soil underground needs to be, the biology underground needs to be protected by the layers that we discussed earlier, that stops the wind and the water moving the topsoil away and killing off the very life of the soil and the planet. Okay, so why is this the natural way? Well, I think we've covered that really when you think about the life in the soil and the way to avoid erosion, that nature seems to have worked out reasonably well over the past 3 billion years of evolution. Now, that's the earliest evidence we have for life on the planet. It may go back further than that, but there's just no evidence for it. But 3 billion years is long enough. And through that 3 billion years of evolution, the system of no bare soil and a soil full of life, it's the best system discovered through the trial and error that is evolution. Evolution doesn't have a purpose in mind. It's just things evolving to exploit niches. But in the process, we've ended up with a highly complex natural world with many, many interlocking webs of life. And I think that's why this is the natural way of doing things, if we can find some way to mimic them. And why should we copy nature? Because it works. It seems almost too obvious to state, but compared to how a lot of gardening has been carried on in the past, particularly in the old world, and how a lot of farming, which grew out of the gardening or in parallel to it, seems to create the same problems. We'll get to that later on in the sessions. Now, most of this is caused by the scientific method. Now, science is a wonderful thing, as we all know, with the COVID-19 rampaging across the globe at the moment. Scientific approach to problem solving is our best hope of finding a vaccine or at least a cure if you get crook. And the nature of doing this is to look down deeper and deeper into smaller and smaller parts of nature and understand them. However, the other extreme is the understanding of ecology, and like I said before, the interlocking webs of life. And that's a rather more difficult thing to pin down scientifically because it's multivariable and it keeps changing, which is the nature of evolution, of course. So the good part of the scientific method is that we can solve problems and create better health systems. The bad side is the hubris. Once we believe we've got everything solved, we don't need to rely on nature. And remember, we're attempting to improve on 3 billion years of evolution. So it's not always ideal. So the bad part of the scientific method is this over-reliance on the reductive method, where we just reduce everything down to smaller and smaller parts without seeing the whole picture. And the other reason to copy nature is that it's easier. It's already been worked out for us. And to put it in the words of one of my mentors, I guess you'd say, well, I never met the man except through his writing, Masanobu Fukuoka of the One Straw Revolution and Natural Farming. I would highly recommend you read at least the One Straw Revolution. It's a fascinating piece. But his catchphrase was, what less can I do? Still with the idea of achieving a yield and feeding himself and the people around him. But his idea was, what less can I do, meaning what more can nature do for me? Which is a different way of looking at the world from the, if I get a bigger tractor, I can grow more food way of approaching things, which was the scientific method and the Green Revolution, which is a whole other subject. So remember, it is easier to go with nature every time. It takes us a little while to adjust to the ways of nature, but that's what this seminar is about too, to give you a few pointers to make it easier. And really, it is so much easier. There's no digging. There's hardly any weeding in the garden. And of course, there's no chemicals. Even though session 4 is on pesticides and herbicides, we'll discuss why they're not good for the soil, let alone the people that are growing the food or the people eating it. So remember, no-dig gardening is easier because there is 1, no digging, 2, hardly any weeds, and there are no chemicals, so it's much safer. So in summary, what does nature do? Nature abhors bare soil. Why is this the natural way? Because it saves soil and combats erosion. And why should we copy nature? Who are we to improve on 3 billion years of evolutionary trial and error? Okay, that's pretty much covered why no dig. Tomorrow I'll be covering heirloom seeds and how they fit into the idea of no-dig gardening. It's very important that we do this and understand the difference between heirloom seeds and hybridised seeds. And not so much the difference, but why the hybridised seeds were developed. Once we understand that, you'll see the joy of heirloom seeds for any number of things. Okay, so that wraps up part 1 of the seminar series. As I said at the beginning, parts 2, 3, 4 and 5 will be added to the feed as they become available. Thanks for listening.